loads of activities in the run-up to the elections happening on the 6th of May. And whilst I've got plenty of questions to put to Hanan and Ikra and Angela and Emily, you should feel like you could ask questions at any time as well, either by using the chat or raise your hand, and feel free to ask it in person. That's absolutely fine. You're all students on the call, I think, most of you, if not all of you. And so some of you might not yet be old enough to vote, but you're interested in politics. Some of you will be voting for the first time, and some of you might have voted numerous times. Regardless of whether you can vote or not on the 6th of May, what happens on that day is relevant to you, because your local councillors have such an important role in your local area. And we've seen that in the pandemic, just how important your neighbourhood is, and just how much time you can spend in your local parks and on your local high streets. I think hopefully this year people will have a heightened sense of the importance of their local councillors and their local communities. So without further ado, I'm absolutely thrilled that we're joined tonight by Hanan Sawa from Wilmslow. He is a Conservative Party councillor. We have Ikra Yassin from Peterborough and the Labour Party, Emily Fermor from Maidstone and the Liberal Democrat Party, and Angela Argenzia from Sheffield and the Green Party, so from up and down the country and across the political spectrum, which is fantastic. So if we could ask the first question, what inspired you to get into politics and stand for election as a local councillor? And you can't see what order you are on my screen, but if we could go top left first to Angela, please, that would be fantastic.
Hi everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. I was always very active, not in a particular political party, from being quite young, actually, from being in high school back initially, and my interest was particularly in human rights and justice and peace, and then life sort of in my kind of late 20s took over, and I had children, I had a job as a teacher, etc. So I stopped being quite as involved with local groups and volunteering, and then Brexit happened. And being a European myself, I felt that I had to actually take things into my hands again, so I started being politically active again. And my good friend Majid, who's the former Lord Mayor of Sheffield and former MEP for Yorkshire and Humber, asked me to stand in 2018, and I was elected in 2019. So it was all very coincidental. And to be honest, when I was asked to stand, I thought I was going to be a paper candidate, which is a candidate for a ward a political party doesn't think they can win, but I was put in basically the most secure ward for the Green Party, and I was elected with a 58% majority. So it was all like a sort of bit of a windmill kind of thing, very quick. And but I've always had an interest in being active in the community, particularly with regards to social justice and human rights. So that's why I'm in politics now.
Amazing. It's really interesting, like how people's personal stories and personal backgrounds become the impetus for when they take the leap into politics. Hanan, may I come to you next?
Yes, hi, good evening everyone. Thank you very much for having me as a panellist. What inspired me to get into politics is always a very interesting question for me. So I actually stood for election when I was 18 years old, and actually when I finished college. And for me, I was actually having withdrawal symptoms from leaving college because I was so active in my high school years, doing various different things. I was looking to find a purpose where I could continue to support my surrounding area and be a champion for my local area. And for me, that's where I saw becoming a councillor as an avenue for me to do that. Interestingly, I never thought I would actually even get selected as a candidate, and never let alone get elected. But May 2018 was a very, very interesting election, and I was very fortunate that I was able to get elected. And my inspiration was actually being able to be able to be in a position where I was able to help so many different people in so many different ways.
Amazing. It's so interesting that both of you didn't expect to be elected, which is interesting. We'll maybe come back to that later. Ikra, may I come to you next?
Yeah, of course. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for having me here. And first of all, I would just like to say it's so amazing to be sharing a panel with young councillors, because I'm not, of course, familiar with your areas, but with my area, I do feel kind of a bit out of place because I'm the only one. So it's just so nice to be able to share a platform with fellow young councillors. So I have been quite active within my area since I was 15, and it was my mum's election that I was quite active in, and then again I had no idea that I was going to be a candidate. It was a bit short notice. I was selected 5 weeks before polling day, so it was quite a bit of a windwell experience. And again, I was up against somebody that had years and years of experience, so I didn't think that I'd stand a chance. But here we are, 2 years later. I'm still a councillor, so it was a bit unexpected, but a fantastic experience at the same time. And it was actually the makeup of my council that pushed me to put myself forward, because it's predominantly male and it's predominantly 50 plus. So I just thought to myself, there's so many young people in my city that need a voice. So that is the reason why I put myself forward, and that is why I'm a councillor today.
Amazing, thank you, and great to pick up on the fact that you are all young councillors. I did purposefully look for young councillors, and it's surprisingly difficult to do, the amount of council websites that I had to troll through to look for young people. Emily.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you so much for having me. It's great to have so many young people interested in politics and sort of here this evening when it is beautiful outside. So I'm very jealous of those youth clubs that are spending the time outdoors. So what inspired me to stand? So for me, politics was very local. I wasn't very political when I was young. I wasn't involved in party politics at university, but I moved back home after university. And one of the things that really struck me when I was growing up was I had a next door neighbour who was a local councillor, and he really, I really looked up to him as I was growing up. I saw all the good things he was doing in the local community, and I really admired all of the effort and the support he gave to local people, everything from campaigning on affordable housing through to supporting the elderly when it snowed, bringing food parcels, etc., making sure they had everything they needed. And so when he asked me to stand in the 2016 election, I sort of jumped at the chance. I wasn't expecting to be elected either. Like Ikra, there was an incumbent who was an old white guy who had been the local councillor there for a very long time before, and I actually won by 1 vote. So to this day, 5 years later, I'm still surprised that I managed to do it. And I just have absolutely loved it and really caught the bug since then. So became a councillor in 2016 and stood as a parliamentary candidate in the 2017 general election as well.
Amazing to hear about just the amazing things that you saw that the previous local councillor had done and contributed to the community, and that's what had inspired you. And I read that you'd won by 1 vote, and I've used that in my sessions, that in the I Have a Voice sessions, where I've been saying to people, your voice matters, like your vote matters. Emily won by 1 vote, so she would tell you that it matters. Brilliant. No, it can often be really difficult for us to imagine what councillors do in their day-to-day role. You know, we see MPs on the TV, don't really see councillors on the TV, might see them in the local news every now and again. But do you have like a standout case study or an achievement that has happened since you became a local councillor that will help us to better understand what it is that you do and why you're important to the community? Emily, may I come to you first this time?
Yeah, of course. So I've told Rebecca actually one of these stories, so this won't be news to her, but the 2 things I think I'm most proudest of over the last few years is, one, I managed to lead a campaign to get the Pride flag flown on top of the town hall. This was really important to me, that young people and people from LGBTQ backgrounds could feel represented by their local council. And it seemed odd to me when it was sort of first, when LGBT Pride Week came round, that we didn't already fly the flag as a sort of regular thing that we did for our local community. So I was really proud of that achievement. I think one of the best things about that, I think, is that it will have a lasting impact on the local community, and people will see year round that everyone is welcome, and we represent all people as a council. And the other one is quite personal. So for me, the biggest things when you're a councillor is when you have an impact on in people's lives that actually make a difference. So we can get caught up in sort of big policies and get excited about sort of what's going on nationally, but it's actually those people that are most in need. And when you're able to help, that really reminds you why you're doing it. And in this instance, it was not that long ago, a young woman was seeking housing. She'd recently been made homeless because she was fleeing domestic abuse, and I was able to speak to the council, get her sorted in temporary accommodation, and support her with finding sort of furniture and getting support from the local area. And I think that often people, maybe like yourselves, don't know what to go to the local council with, or don't know how they can have support on an issue they're facing in their personal lives. And in this instance, the struggle was really sort of getting through to the council, because they had a huge caseload and they didn't know what to prioritise. And I was able to sort of champion her in that instance, and made a real difference to her life, which I'm super proud of.
So two really amazing examples. Thank you, Emily. Angela, may I come to you next? And I noticed that you said in the chat that you're not that young, but 45% of councillors are retired. So in the you are.
Yeah, well, I think lots of people think I'm much younger than I am, and so I just wanted to. I am much older. Probably could have birthed all, all the people on the screen. But anyway, I was just trying to think, and I want to give you an example of what councillors, so local politicians, can do to counteract what actually happens nationally. So I'm going to tell you something that happened a year before I was elected, but obviously my group and all the councillors from across the board were involved in. So in Sheffield there are two very large hospitals. One is the Hallamshire, that is a teaching hospital, is the one where the medical school is, and the other one is the Northern General, where the A&E department for adults is located. The Northern General is in the northern part of the city, is a bit out of the city centre. Incredible facilities, both of them, but there is a minor injury unit at the Hallamshire, which is not quite A&E, but it's closer to the centre of the city, so it's more central if you want. And this was due to be axed and closed down back in 2018. So the CCG, which is the Clinical Commissioning Group, because of the cuts to the NHS, they had to make savings, and so that was one of the ways they were going to save money. So the pressure that the local councillors, together with grassroots organisations like Sheffield Saved Our NHS, put on the CCG, meant that unit was saved. And I have personally gone there 3 times since I've lived in Sheffield, and it's a very handy place to have, and it makes a massive difference to local people to have that very, very accessible point of contact, in terms of, if you cut your finger, if you stub your toe, if you're not sure whether you're broken a finger or a toe or an arm and you don't want to go all the way to A&E, it's a very, very important facilities to have. So that was safe because the local councillors put pressure on the CCG, together with a lot of other organisations. And in terms of my personal kind of achievement, I, like Emily, I'm very much about the favourite part of being a councillor for me is when I managed to help a local resident doing something that might be really simple. So for me, it might mean just to write an email or make a phone call, but for them it is a huge thing. So during the pandemic, it's been particularly difficult for people who are not internet savvy. Everything is moved online, and if you don't have internet access at home, or if you're a bit older, if like this particular resident thinking about used to rely on the library to access the internet, and with the library shut during the pandemic, she couldn't go to the library anymore, and she wanted to put in like an objection to a planning application right next door to her. That would have meant that her garden would have been completely in the shade for most of the day, a tiny little backyard garden. So she rang me, and I did a visit in the garden kind of thing, and then she couldn't upload things online, so I scanned everything for her and uploaded everything online. And it was, it wasn't a huge deal for me, it didn't take that much time, but for her, for Janet, that was everything, because she lives on her own, she doesn't have internet access at home. So I think that is the most satisfying thing, is when you do something that is relatively easy, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily solve the problem for the resident, but the simple fact that you've made that contact, that you've responded, that you've actually taken notice, that is the most important thing for them. So that is, for me, is the thing that gives me the most satisfaction.
Thank you. That's another two really great examples about things that you perhaps take for granted that you have access to on your doorstep until you don't, and local councillors really understand their local areas and the potential impact of that for local people. So that's brilliant. Hanan, may I come to you next?
Thank you. I could go on for a very long time about this, but I'll try to keep brief. If I do waffle on, feel free to interject.
Okay, I'll give a signal.
For me, it was a big issue actually when I got elected, bearing in mind I was actually 18 and everyone else in my council was nearly 60, 70 plus. So I was actually put up against a lot of resistance. And I remember to this date my first ever council meeting where I wasn't allowed to talk properly. I was told what to do and what not to do, and it became a very, very daunting experience. And that day I realised is I got in politics to actually have a voice and stand up for what I believe in. And from that day onwards, I decided I will speak my mind and I will vote the way I want to vote. And there's been various different occasions where I've been told off actually for voting in a way that wasn't, which my colleagues wouldn't vote in. For example, so many controversial different topics and that have come up for discussion. But for me, it was the wrong thing to do, to vote in favour or vote against certain policies. And so for me, one of my standout achievements would be the response during the COVID pandemic. My council took a very laissez-faire approach to the response with COVID. They weren't very eager to do a lot of stuff for various different reasons. So unfortunately, I essentially had the workload of all councillors, and the big thing for me was the COVID testing centre that our council had to set up and run, and it was the council's job to set the testing centre up, to liaise with the officials and make sure that testing centre was up and running. And I remember the first 2 months of the pandemic, I was working easily 20 hours a day, because not only helping on the COVID testing centre, the caseload for myself and my colleagues that I was picking up the slack for across the council became quite intense, and there was so many people who genuinely had no idea what to do in certain instances. So many people lost their job, universal credit became a big topic. There was so many areas of life that were now falling through the gaps because of the response to the pandemic, and all the key resources were focused on COVID and the response to that. So my standout achievement was helping so many different people in so many different ways, and it gets really emotional actually. For example, I did a food drop for a lady who attested. She was an 85-year-old lady who tested positive for COVID. And one evening I went to a house and dropped off some food and some resources to it. And the next morning I get a phone call. She's in a hospital in an ICU bed. And it was just like, it just became so intense, and her family was struggling to get stuff in place. And as a councillor, people were reaching out to us to help, get things done. And it's the satisfaction you get from when you're able to help people. And that was one extreme situation. There's so many different instances where people genuinely have no idea what to do. And they feel like their world is crashing, but local councillors have that knowledge of the local area, and they're really able to get to the specific nooks and crooks of certain issues and engage people in the right ideas. There's a planning application once, and the resident was trying to chase the planning officer for nearly 6 months, and they weren't getting a response from the officers of the council. And for me, it took one email and one phone call that took 20 minutes, and I got a response the next day, and that resident's issue was solved 6 months later. But for 6 months, that resident's life became misery because he just was not getting the response and the help they needed. So the role of a local councillor is really to be a champion of your local community and really be able to be that voice for so many people who essentially don't really have a voice. Now we're coming out of the recovery from COVID. There's a really, really clear message from our residents that they wanted our council to be very, very visible and have a very big post-recovery response. And it took a cross-party sort of coalition group to get the council to invest so much money in the post-COVID recovery response. So hopefully, once restrictions ease, people in our town will be able to live life normally and actually be able to visit the town centre. There's so many shops that are now derelict. The streets are empty. The parks were empty at one point. And now as a council, we're able to invest that money and resources in making them areas attractive to people. So once we get our freedom back, they're allowed to actually enjoy their local area and make the most of it.
That's brilliant. I saw everyone nod their head when you spoke about being champions for your local communities and your local areas, which from what you have all said is exactly the role that you are fulfilling. Thank you, Hannah. Ikra.
Thank you. So my response isn't going to be very different to what's already been said, and I think that's where the role of the councillor is so personal. I mean, over the last year where we've been in lockdown, I think for councillors there's been so many moments which we can all be proud of, because it certainly hasn't been easy, and it's not going to be easy for the coming months where we support our residents in the recovery period. I mean, over the last year, there's been so many projects that I've been working on. For a whole year, we've been supporting our homeless guests who have been living in hotels. So we supply meals for them, and it's so emotional because I've personally done quite a few drop-offs myself, and we all go down. My brothers and my sister, bless them, they're always so hands-on and supporting me. And we went down to drop food off, and they were so happy, and they were asking what's for dinner, and it just put so much into perspective. Like, imagine you having to wait for somebody to come and drop dinner off. It's just little things like that we don't appreciate and we take for granted so easily. And this past year has been such an eye-opener for me, because growing up, I've had a pretty comfortable and privileged life. I've never had to struggle, and that's quite I don't know what the word is, but it might sound very snobbish of me that I've never seen struggle. It's because my parents have never let me see struggle. But had I been on my own, I don't know what I would have done. And I think seeing people out there struggling really, really makes you appreciate life and appreciate things. And I think that's what I'm so grateful for myself being a counsellor, because I wouldn't have experienced all of this if I wasn't. And again, with the NHS staff, they've been tired, they're exhausted, and they're still carrying on, and they're helping our residents and helping everyone, and keeping things moving. And I think that is another project that was really successful that we participated in, dropping meals off for them, because so many of nurses did not get a chance to even sit down and have 5 minutes to themselves, let alone prepare lunch or eat or anything like that. And so we participated in that, and it's just been so many things that have been going on. And again, with my the council in my area, they haven't been so prompt in responding to people, residents, and their requests and the stuff that they need help with. And it's quite unfortunate that that's happened, because we can support our residents. We have a duty of care towards them, and the fact that it hasn't been so full on from my council, it is quite disappointing. But I think that's where I've managed to, and along with my colleagues, I wouldn't have been able to do any of this on my own, but alongside them, we've managed to keep things going. And definitely the next few months are going to be more difficult than the year that we already had, with coming out of lockdown and heading towards recovery. So I think that's what's going to be more challenging for us, and I guess for all of us councillors here, because each resident has their own concerns, they have their own needs, and we need to support them in their own different ways. I think that's what's going to be more difficult. So I guess if you ask me the same question in a few months' time, my response may be very different. But yeah, there's been many moments over the last year, and I think one of the moments that stands out to me the most during the whole time that I've been elected is I was a new councillor, so I was literally going everywhere and making sure people knew who I was, and people knew how they could get in contact with me. And one of the things that I really enjoyed during my campaign, and I kind of really do miss over the lockdown period, is my coffee mornings with my the residents at the housing association. So they do have a coffee morning regularly, and I used to pop in there, and it used to be amazing getting to know them all individually and things like that. And there's been so many community events that I've attended with them, and there was one resident and she lived on her own, and she was hoarding. And no one really understood why that was happening. She lived on her own. If you speak to her outside, she's such a lovely lady. She's got so much to offer, and she's so amazing. And when I first met her, I had no idea that this was all going on. In fact, she didn't come and talk to me about it. It was one of her friends who, again, I met at a coffee morning. And she told me, she said, okay, this is what she's going through. Can you please look into it for me and let me know how we can support her? I said, okay, just leave it with me. So I chased up the officers, had a meeting with them, and it turned out she was missing her husband. So she lived on her own, and her husband has passed away, and she was still living in that house that she'd lived in for 40 odd years. But she was terrified of being upstairs on her own in case she got ill or she passed away or anything like that. So slowly, everything from upstairs started to move downstairs, and it got to a point where she never ever saw the upstairs of her house. And she knew that there was an issue somewhere, because she would never let anybody come into her house, whether that's neighbours or family or friends. No one went to her house. And along with the officers, we managed to get some support workers in. They helped her clear her house, get rid of things that maybe she didn't need. And it was such a big achievement that she actually had her neighbours come round to visit her to see her cat. And it was amazing that so many years that this has been happening, and no one would have realised. If Rosemary, her friend, hadn't have told me, maybe the resident would have still been in that same situation, feeling isolated and lonely. And I think that always stands out to me, and I'll always remember that. Like, I mean, whenever I see my resident, we never ever talk about it, because I don't want to embarrass her, so I never ever talk about it. But I can see when she looks at me that I know one day she is going to talk to me about it, but I don't want it to come from me, because I don't want to make her feel small. And I think it gets down to the whole personal factor, that you get so down and personal with some of the residents, because some of these issues that, I mean, certainly if I was going through that, I would never ever want to talk to anyone about it, because I'd feel really embarrassed. And I think some residents do, and that's where, if I wasn't a councillor, I wouldn't have been able to contribute to that. So yeah, that was one of my super proud moments.
Amazing. I think what I've been really struck by the breadth of examples that you've given, and that you really, like, councillors have a really important role when people at their time of crisis. Like, I didn't recognise that and realise that at all. Angela, what's the best way for people to raise ideas that they have with their local area and their local council? Obviously, sometimes it will be that they're in need. Sometimes it will be that they have ideas and things that they want to see happen, particularly I imagine in COVID recovery. What's the best way for them to get in touch?
To get in touch with me, you mean? I mean, people do in all sorts of ways. So people can contact, obviously my details are public, so people email me and telephone me regularly. I try to switch my phone off at the weekend, because otherwise I would be, doing this and eating into family time. So I do try not to, but yeah, it's very tempting. People contact me on social media, messages on Twitter. I had some casework I picked up this week, last weekend actually, on Saturday, via Facebook, which is it's not even my council thing, it's my private Facebook. So I can't get away from it. What I miss though is the door knocking, because unlike the big parties, the Green Party in Sheffield at least, we do door knocking all year round. So we don't just do it at election time, because we work as community activists. So even as councillors, we go door knocking all the time. So the COVID pandemic has meant that we've not been able to have that contact with the people that don't have access to, who are not digitally savvy or don't have access, or the people like the lady that Ikra was talking about, you might meet her on the street, or she might ring you and you may have no idea what goes on behind that closed door. And often on the doorstep is where I pick up a lot of casework that wouldn't come to me normally. But this week I'm officially on leave, so I've got out of office replies, I've got a voicemail on my thing, but I've been working all day. So this morning I met with a colleague, because we were going to look at a building site that a visually impaired resident had problems with because of the noise. It'd been going on for nearly a year and she wasn't very happy. So we went to see her we stood in her garden and she was on the back door and we were chatting. And then just before going out, one of the businesses, one of the little cafes near there, had actually emailed and said, I don't have any outdoor space, so how do I go about getting the parking space that is outside, my premises, so that I can put a few tables, block it off. And so it happens all the time. And at the moment, there are lots of grants for the recovery for businesses. So there is a recovery fund. So lots of the shopping areas, the local shopping areas in Sheffield. Sheffield is like a lot of different villages. If you come here, it's a really weird place, because you always meet someone that knows someone that that went to school with your sister, your brother. It's really, although it's a big city, it feels very much like a village. And I am very privileged to work here, but I am particularly proud of my ward, because it's a very, very mixed ward. There are some pockets of true affluence. There are very middle class areas, but it also has one of the most deprived areas in the city itself. So it is very varied, and there are lots of shopping precincts and areas, and they're all getting together and brainstorming, all the businesses together, how they can put projects together to apply for these grants. And there are two kind of grants. There's a 50,000 and a 200,000 grant to regenerate a whole area. So they're all coming up with lots of ideas, outdoor seating, having exhibitions, redoing all the shop fronts so that they all match. They're all coming up with ideas, and obviously they're contacting you. But yeah, I think we are very lucky, because there are so many ways people can contact you. One thing I would say is I try to, and I can see that the other councillors here are the same. I make myself as available as possible, and I have a couple of people who just ring me every so often because they have mental health problems and they don't have anywhere else to go, and they just want to chat. I mean, I'm not a counsellor, and obviously I don't give any kind of advice, but I do have a couple of people that every so often they will ring me because they've got my number, and I will spend half an hour on the phone with them chatting about nothing much, but for them living on their own, being isolated and having mental health problems is a big thing. So yeah, people can contact me as they want. Sometimes I wish they didn't use social media, but they do. I mean, social media is now part of our life, isn't it? So yes, casework comes in, from all sorts of places.
So interesting to hear the wide range of things, from telephone call to email. If anyone wants to look up their local council, just go into your city council or your county council or whatever your council structure is, their website, and you can find your councillors there by ward, by political party, and yeah, telephone numbers, social media, and it sounds like more formal things as well, like funding opportunities and things like that, which is really exciting. Emily, I might come to you for the next question, if that's okay, because I think this is something that you would have to do as part of your day job as well. What's the best way for people to find out about candidates before they decide how to vote, and like look up different information about councillors and see if their priorities align with what they think is important?
That's a good question, and I think it's frustratingly in many ways, but perhaps positively in other ways. There's no sort of straightforward answer, and it partly depends on what drives you. So we all of us in this meeting here represent political parties, and it may be that the national position of those political parties is something that drives you and will determine how you'd like to vote locally. But also you'll find that there are lots of sort of local issues, and there'll be a sort of presence from local candidates who will put out leaflets. So just like Angela, I miss door knocking. So you'll have lots of people coming around and knocking on your door. They're really just to canvass your opinion, see what your concerns and issues are in the local area, and then respond to those. You may have leaflets through the door, but a good sort of first step, I would say, if you don't have a sort of a national political allegiance, but that you're interested in finding out more about your local councils, is looking at the sort of makeup of that council, who currently represents your ward, and that's the sort of area in which you vote. So it may be that it's your sort of part of the city, or in my case, it's a collection of like 5 villages. So you may find that you have sort of existing councillors that you can call up, ask their opinion. They'll be putting out material, and often they'll have sort of Facebook campaign profiles that you can look at and see the issues that they care about. And it's really about finding out what of those things that drive your vote, whether that's a sort of national housing policy, or whether that's a local response to a certain housing development, and then seeing who best aligns with your views. And as I think other councillors are reflected on in this call, a lot of that for me is seeing a council that's representative of the local area. And one of the great things about being a council over the last few years is being able to provide a voice to those young people who feel otherwise sort of not represented by others that already exist on the council. So it may be that also drives your vote too.
I'm on mute. Amazing, thank you, Emily. It'd be really great to hear from one of those who've joined the calls, like when you're trying to find out about the people that you might be able to vote for in elections. What do you want to know? Like, what do you want to know about them? How do you want to find out about them? And what interests you in local elections? Because what's wonderful is that you have come along to hear from some local councillors, and we know that turnout generally at local elections is very low. It's just over 30% on average across England. So it'd be great if there is a volunteer from those who've joined the call as a participant, what you'd like to know about local councillors, or any ideas you have for how we engage more young people with local elections. I'll wait a moment and see if we get any ideas. No. I'll ask the next question, but it'd be great if you could pop in the chat any ideas that you have for how to engage young people, because you are obviously engaged young people, so that would be Fantastic. Thinking about engagement, Hanan, why do you think that voter turnout is low in local elections, and how do you think we could fix it?
For me, I generally think a lot of, especially when I was in high school or school, I didn't know who my local councillor was or what my local council did. I do think the educational system does need some reform to include some sort of political education during your educational years, ideally not biased, to teach people about the role of their local councillors, their MPs, and the way the government system works. So many young people I've come across recently have no idea how to search which area they're in, which council they fall under, and it's not helpful that our political system is very, very confusing. The way certain councils are formed, for example, one of my ward literally ends halfway through a street, and the house on the other side or from a different ward have a different councillor. So it can become very, very confusing for people. So I think one issue is how complex politics can become, and we tend to focus on the red lines and the confusing stuff than the benefits of local council. So first point is education. There's a lack of education about politics. Secondly, voting, people find it hard. I do a postal vote because I work, I'm busy in a university, and if I didn't have my postal vote, I actually wouldn't vote, I don't think, because I wouldn't have the time to go to the polling station. So many young people actually forget that they can have the postal vote, which makes voting a lot easier. And thirdly, I think, especially in my generation, there is I think there's a lot of lack of trust in politicians recently as well, especially from the younger generation. For example, I'll bring up the famous B word, Brexit. It affected the younger generation so much more than the older generation, but we didn't have a voice in that referendum. It's going to be our lives that were affected. But the majority of the voters were over 65s. So I feel like there's a sense of betrayal in the political system as well. So many young people feel disengaged. They feel politicians aren't listening to their needs and their issues. And younger people's issues are a lot more different than issues of older, mature people. I want to know, for example, what's the housing market going to be like for me when I want to jump on the property ladder? What's the investment going to be in infrastructure and rail? This is important to me because as a young person, I want to know what my career prospects are, what my life prospects are. And majority of politicians sometimes actually forget that young people want to know. We do have this passion and they don't go out seeking it. And I think the one benefit of this pandemic is how we've been able to learn to connect virtually. I've been able to speak, I think, at nearly 100 different events now across the country to people who would never be able to hear from a politician or a young politician, and they're able to actually get an insight. And I think over the last 12 months, there's been a real conversation between politicians and the wider community. And I've seen so many different events that so many esteemed politicians have done and former politicians have done, actually trying to engage young people. I think the ball is finally clicked. People are realizing that young people want to get involved. We want to know what's going on. And they're now giving younger people that attention and justifying the time they spend with them. So there's a wide complex of issues going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that young people are 100% engaged in politics. For those of you on the call, if you're not sure who you're, which elections are coming up and which ward you're in, therefore which councillors you'll be voting for, I've just popped a link in the chat, and if you put your postcode in there, it will tell you your ward and you can take a look and see what's coming up in your local area. Hanan, you spoke brilliantly then about young people caring about specific political issues. Ikra, I've heard you speak about this so passionately before, so I'd love to hear from you about going one step further, I guess, and young people who, like yourself, stand for election, and kind of how you went about that, and any advice that you have for how people can take that first step towards perhaps getting involved in local politics.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much opportunities. First of all, you need to do your research. Research is really important. You need to know which party is best in line with what your values and your morals are. Look at their policies on a national and a local level, because once you do become elected, you will represent that party even on the national level. Like when you look at for example, I'm a Labour councillor, but now I represent the national Labour policies and values that they have. So definitely do your research, know which party is the best one for you, that represents you, and that is well inclined with what your values are, and just go for it. I mean, I know that there's a huge misconception that young people can't be councillors. I mean, all four of us are living proof that age is just a number. Literally, you can be a councillor at whatever age you want, and there's been some fantastic achievements across the panel, which we've all heard tonight. So there's, no matter where you are in the country, what area you're in, there's always going to be a local action team. We certainly have one in every area in Peterborough, and I'm sure there's going to be one wherever you're based. So once you have decided which party that you want to represent, just reach out and connect with people, even if that particular party does not have any sitting councillors in your area. There will be a team that is working that ward or working that area, so definitely get in contact with them. Social media is a wonderful tool that we have, so you can easily find people or find activists and councillors online. All you have to do is literally search your area, and loads of things will come up. And I think political parties are getting very clever now as well, because they know that they have to engage young people, so they are moving with young people in terms of the world of social media. For example, before, where we would have just been on Twitter or Facebook, we're now heading towards Instagram as well, because they know that young people use that app a lot. I was playing music on SoundCloud the other day, and there was an advert that came up on there. So I think political parties are getting more and more tech savvy with because they know that their audience is across all platforms. So there are things everywhere. You can easily find information about any political party, regardless of what platform you're on. So definitely reach out to them. If you need any advice, I mean, of course, I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the panelists here today, that if you do need our advice, please do get in touch with us. We are on all of the major platforms anyway, and we're quite easy to find. So we're always here for any advice and any support. And of course, we've shared our stories here today. And yeah, any advice, we're always here. But yeah, literally just go for it.
Thank you so much. I have three quickish fire questions for you now. My first one is, if you could either introduce, change or abolish one local council policy, what would it be and why? So give you a moment to think. It's quite a tricky one. If you could introduce, change or abolish, what would you do and why? Emily, you smiled then, which makes me think maybe you've thought of something, so I might come to you first.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not straightforward and I don't know how it'd be achieved, but I think more accountability for an ability for councillors to actually make an impact on housing developments in the area. It's one of the biggest issues of contention for local residents, that they have no say in the planning process, and when they are given a say to object, there's very little power for local councillors to do anything because it's so centrally controlled. So I think there's a real disconnect there between accountability for residents and for councils. Brilliant,
thank you. As you were saying that, I could think of a handful of people that I think would agree with that, which shows it's obviously one that would be popular. Angela, may I come to you next?
Thank you, Emily. I was going to say that, so I'm going to say something different. Yeah, we've had quite a lot on planning. Planning is really difficult locally, because even when you manage to object to something as a councillor and throw something out, then people can appeal nationally and it gets put back in, so it's really difficult. For me, I would declare a biodiversity emergency. Most councils in the country have declared a climate emergency, but biodiversity is as important. You know, councils up and down the country still use very harmful pesticides to control weeds, rather than let the weeds and the flowers there for the bees. And wildlife and biodiversity is so important for the planet, is so important for us as human beings, but we are destroying the planet. So for me, that would be very important, and it would show leadership, and then it would also mean that we can then do something about it as a local council. and as residents ourselves. So that's what I would do.
I've seen that as a petition which I've signed actually towards my local council, to stop using the pesticides and things like that to help with biodiversity. So
yeah,
interesting
for
the country. Yeah. Hanan, may I come to you next?
I would declare a mental health emergency, which will involve large funding towards mental health services, not just for students, but for the adult population. We're in a COVID pandemic, but I also think a mental health epidemic is on the horizon. So many people have struggled the last 12 months, and there's very, very little support. Very recently, a lot of councils, they've had to make budget cuts through austerity. And the things that are getting slashed are stuff like mental health services, and they're being neglected. So I would declare a mental health emergency and invest large amounts of money in to ensure that there's a lot of facilities available for people of all ages and all groups and backgrounds.
So important at the moment. Thank you, Hanan. Ikra.
I would declare a domestic abuse emergency. I think that goes quite hand in hand with what Hanan just said, because domestic abuse can also have a huge impact on somebody's mental health. You don't see you don't see domestic abuse taking place, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And I know there are definitely things happening on a national level with the bill coming out, but I think there's never enough that we can do, especially with the pandemic, where domestic abuse is certainly on the rise. And I know in my local area, we used to have a women's centre that has closed down because of lack of money and lack of resources. So I would definitely love to see that reopen, because it is definitely a service that we need, and will be hugely beneficial to certainly residents of Peterborough. And I think the whole country, up and down the country, every single council should follow suit. So definitely domestic abuse.
Thank you. Yeah, and the work that you've done on domestic abuse in your area is excellent as well. The next quickfire one is, in one sentence, why is it important that people vote in the upcoming elections? And Ikra, I'm going to come straight back to you.
I mean, I've been spending the last week knocking on doors asking people to vote and why they should be voting, so this should be fairly easy for me. I mean, I've always said it, that this is our once in a year chance to have our say, and it is our right. Why shouldn't we? And I think, of course, from what we've discussed tonight, more and more people are becoming inclined with politics and what is happening, and your vote makes a huge impact. I mean, look at Emily. If she didn't have that one vote, she would probably not be sat around this panel today. So every single vote matters, and it is your chance to have a say as to who represents you. Because I see far too many people. I mean, of course, being a councillor, you do see the positives and the negatives, where people are always moaning about things where there's no change. Well, you have that say in having a change. Please use it. And I mean, sometimes I can come across blunt when I say this, but sometimes it just needs to be said. And yeah, as I said, it's your once in a year chance of deciding who you want to be your representative in public office, and it's your right. So please do exercise that. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I was going to come around to everybody, but I feel like you have covered everything. Does anyone have anything to add to that excellent response to that question? Angela, yeah.
I totally agree with you, Ikra, but also, coming back to the education and the fact that maybe there isn't enough emphasis in education. I was a teacher for 16 years and I taught modern languages, but I also taught citizenship and PSHE, how it was called at the time. And it very much depends on the teacher, how that you deliver certain lessons. But I come from a different country. I was educated in a different country, and I was always told that voting was my right, but it was also my duty. It was my duty because people had died for me to be able to vote. And I always think about, as a woman, of all the suffragettes that put their life on the line, and they put themselves through hell in prison and being force-fed and all of that. And that's why you should vote. You should vote because people before you made sure that you could. So because you can do it.
Absolutely. Two brilliant responses. Take heed of what's happened in history and get out there and do it. Thank you so much. So the closing question for you all, I'm just going to come around and in a few words, finish this sentence. I have a voice. Hanan.
Despite it being a year, it's always hard to find the mute and unmute button. I have a voice because I refuse to be silenced. It's not a question of being silenced, it's a question of speaking out and speaking out for what you believe in, even if other people disagree with you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hanan. Emily.
I think I'll say I have a voice because if I don't speak up, other people will speak for me.
Thank you. Ikra, I have a voice.
I have a voice, and if I don't use it, it'll probably discourage other people not to use theirs.
Thank you. Angela.
I have a voice and I will use it to represent people in my constituency.
Thank you so much. Such fantastic answers. Thank you for your time this evening. I really appreciated it. And it was great to hear all of your stories. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Very nice
Thank
to
you
meet
for having
everybody.
us.
Thank you.